Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on restoring the Whiteshell Laboratories site. My name is Mike Giardini. I'm a communications officer at CNL. First, I would like to acknowledge that the Whiteshell Restoration Project is located on Treaty 1 and Treaty 3 territory, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. As an organization, CNL recognizes and appreciates Indigenous people's connection to these places. CNL also recognizes the contributions that First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening the communities where these projects are situated, and to this country as a whole. So what we'll do for this webinar, if you haven't been to any bi-monthly webinars, is we start with a presentation and we hope to finish around the half-hour mark, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So the Q&A works, you will have to type in your questions, and you can do that at any time during the presentation, and we will get to your question at the end. We'll go over all the questions and answer them until the time is up. And if we don't get to your question, we do send out written responses to questions we don't get to all the people that registered. Okay, so we do simultaneous interpretation. So you can access this session in French through the globe icon on the bottom right. And just select the language you like to hear. Please use the Q&A function. We've been through that, so that's in your top right, I believe. And we do record the sessions because we like to post on YouTube in about a week's time for people that can attend this live session. If you have any issues, please email ermstakeholder@cnl.ca. So our speaker today is Alan Caron. He is the director of the Whiteshell Site End State Strategy. So Alan has a great presentation for you today. So Alan, after you.
All right, thanks, Michael. And I'm really glad you could all join us today. As Michael mentioned, my name is Alan Caron. I am the director of Whiteshell End State Strategy, located here at Whiteshell. I have been here for almost 15 years, born and raised in nearby Kenora, Ontario, on the north shore of beautiful Lake of the Woods. The focus of this presentation will be the land use and end state plan that we've been working on over the last number of years. So we go to the next slide, please. And the next one. All right, so for over 60 years, the Whiteshell site's been part of this community in eastern Manitoba. Established in 1963, the Whiteshell site was home to federal government nuclear research involving clean energy, waste management, and reactor strategy that has greatly benefited Canadians and people living around the world. At one point, it was one of Western Canada's largest research facilities, and it is the second largest of AECL's sites operated by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Our headquarters are located in Chalk River, Ontario. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. For those who are unaware of where the Whiteshell site is, it is located about 100 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg and 10 kilometers west of the town of Pinawa, near the shore of the Winnipeg River, downstream from the Seven Sisters Hydro Dam. It is located on Treaty 1 and Treaty 3 territory, and also on the traditional homeland of the Red River Métis. The site covers an area of 4,375 hectares, or 11,000 acres. In 1998, the Government of Canada announced the closure of the Whiteshell Laboratories site. Any programs that were to continue were transferred to Chalk River Laboratories in Ontario. AECL began the decommissioning process by completing an environmental assessment known as the Comprehensive Study Report in 2002. Shortly after that, the Whiteshell Laboratories received its first decommissioning license from the regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or the CNSC. All work on this site is being done under that decommissioning license, which has been renewed 3 times since then and expires at the end of 2024. In the mid-2000s, AECL then began to staff up accordingly to begin the decommissioning or the restoration of the Whiteshell site. To clarify the roles of everyone involved, I've mentioned CNL, AECL, and our regulator, the CNSC. So a little bit more detail. Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, or AECL, is responsible for the site. Their mandate is to enable nuclear science and technology and to protect the environment by fulfilling the Government of Canada's radioactive waste and decommissioning responsibilities. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL, is the contractor responsible for carrying out the restoration and waste management activities at the Whiteshell site. In fact, CNL manages all of AECL sites. The CNSC, or the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, is an independent federal regulator. They are responsible for the regulation of the nuclear materials and, in our case, issues our licenses to carry out our activities. AECL and CNL are committed to safely restoring the land so that it can serve the needs of the local communities, Métis, and First Nations for years to come. CNL, under contract by AECL, is scheduled to complete the restoration work required at the Whiteshell site in the early 2030s. Go to the next slide, please. The focus of this webinar is to give some background and update on the Whiteshell site and to introduce you to the land use and state plan that is currently in draft. We will get into that a little bit more detail later in this presentation. Okay, next slide, please. Now we will share and discuss the cleanup and waste management strategies being considered and implemented at the Whiteshell site. CNL and AECL are committed to safely restoring the site so that it can serve the needs of local communities and Indigenous nations. This includes the demolition of existing buildings and infrastructure, the safe removal and handling of waste, and monitoring of the environment in and around the site for the next 100 years. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. The site itself is split into 2 main locations. The main campus is near the Winnipeg River and is where the main buildings are located, including the WR1 reactor that operated between 1965 and 1985. The waste management area is located a few kilometers to the northeast and safely stores the nuclear wastes that were generated here over the life of the site. Okay, the next slide, please. To date, CNL has demolished over 40 buildings. We have safely transported 6,700 cubic meters of radioactive waste to our Chalk River site in Ontario. We minimize waste by sorting materials and recycling as much as possible. Annually, we collect and analyze thousands of samples through our environmental monitoring program. On the right side is a picture of our former radioactive liquid waste treatment center being remediated just a few years ago. All forms of waste found on site are safely managed and stored as is generated to then be disposed of properly and safely. So there's radioactive waste like contaminated equipment, tools that were used over the years, personal protective equipment, gloves, boot covers, and those are stored in cans, bags. We also have soils and liquids, fuels in the form of bundles or fragments. We also have clean recyclables that are free of radioactive contamination. Scrap metal and cardboard. All of this goes off-site for recycling. There's also clean asbestos waste from building materials or piping insulation, and that's also sent off-site for safe disposal. We have hazardous wastes, PCB, lead, asphalt roofing materials, hydrocarbons, laboratory chemicals. All those are sent off-site to approved facilities for safe processing and disposal. And lastly, we have mixed waste, which is a mix of hazardous waste that also has radioactive contamination. Those get processed at special facilities for safe disposal as well. Okay. Our waste management area. So currently, all radioactive waste is safely and securely stored at the site's waste management area. There are 3 types of radioactive waste being stored here. They are high-level waste, like used reactor fuel bundles that were used in the WR1 reactor. We have intermediate level waste, like contaminated tools and small bits of nuclear materials from various laboratory experiments over the years. And lastly, we have low-level waste. This waste is slightly contaminated, and examples of that would include gloves, boot covers, mop heads, rags, and paper suits that employees have worn to protect themselves. The standpipes and bunkers waste retrieval system is currently being built and tested in Southern Ontario as we speak. And operators are also being trained at the same time. When complete, this equipment will be shipped to Whiteshell. To get an idea of the size of the equipment, it will take about 175 semi-trucks to transport the equipment to Whiteshell. It is a first-of-a-kind waste handling, sorting, and packaging system for intermediate level waste from the standpipes and bunkers located at the waste management area. There are about 170 standpipes and 7 bunkers that store the waste that was generated while Whiteshell was in operation. As we retrieve this waste, it will be packaged and shipped using specialized transport casks for safe storage in Chalk River. According to our plans, there are a few locations at the Whiteshell site where we are proposing to leave some residual radiological materials. The first being the low-level radioactive waste that was emplaced in trenches at the waste management area. The second is the proposed in situ disposal of the WR1 reactor. Before either of these can proceed, they must be approved by going through a rigorous regulatory approval process. This process includes extensive public and Indigenous engagement, as well as taking the necessary steps to ensure the safety of the public, workers, and the environment. There may be a few other small areas that may have some residual contamination that could either be radiological or non-radiological, where, though measurable, will be well within established safe margins for the public, workers, and the environment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and on to the next one. As I mentioned earlier, the remediation at the Whiteshell site is slated to be complete in the early 2030s. The long-term plan that includes in-depth details on how the Whiteshell site will be restored and the steps that will be taken to reach that final state is called the Land Use End State Plan. The plan is currently in draft and in the process of public and Indigenous engagement. As well as public and Indigenous engagement, the main elements of the plan also include decommissioning and remediation strategy, which includes waste management, potential hazards and environmental risks, land use options and recommendations. As mentioned, the plan is in draft form and it is a living document that is being continually updated as information and feedback is gathered. While many areas of the restoration will be guided by regulatory requirements, there are sections within the plan where public input can be gathered and considered. So things like environmental monitoring and future land uses for various areas of the site. Okay, good. So we've been engaging on the land use end state plan for about a year now, and some examples of the more common concerns we have heard are to grow economic development opportunities for the region, both on and off the site, using the site for traditional rights-based activities, environmental protection, and in particular the nearby Winnipeg River, and also waste disposal plans for the waste that is being generated and stored on site. The land use end state timeline, or the land use end state plan, is an important part of the licensing process. Whiteshell's decommissioning license was renewed back in 2019 and is up for renewal in late 2024. Hearings are planned in the local Pinawa area in October of this year. The engagement and development of the next draft of the plan will extend through the renewal process. We plan on having a Rev 0 of the plan ready for the fall of 2025, but not after a rigorous public and Indigenous engagement and input. Okay, and next slide as well, please. Though when we are done remediating the site, done remediation of the site in the early 2030s, this does not mean the end of the site itself. There are a few things we know that can serve as guideposts in determining future uses. It is CNL's mission on behalf of CNL to restore the Whiteshell site, and that is not changing. AECL is and will be responsible for the site for the foreseeable future. And AECL will consider a variety of options when it comes to future land uses, both nuclear and non-nuclear. Next slide, please. Okay, good. The site is proposed to be cleaned up into industrially recognized categories. Each land use category represents what types of activities could be done on that piece of land, depending on what type of contamination remains. The agricultural category represents land that has been completely unaffected by activities at Whiteshell and has or will have nothing residual left behind. It does not necessarily mean that it'll be converted to farmland. It just represents the cleanliness of the land. In this case, it is the cleanest. On the other side of the spectrum is the most restrictive category at the bottom, and that's called restricted access. This is because there will be contamination left in the ground that could warrant access restrictions and enhanced environmental monitoring. Okay, next slide, please. As you can see from this map, the Whiteshell site is quite large, roughly 4,400 hectares or 11,000 acres. If the restoration goes as planned, when we are done, just over 4,000 hectares or 91% will be unrestricted or agricultural and be available for any use. 5% or 215 hectares will be recreational use and may have some sort of access control and monitoring. 1.5% or 62 hectares would be considered industrial use and will have access control or fencing and some kind of environmental monitoring. And lastly, 0.4% will be designated as restricted access, such as the WR1 in situ disposal and the trenches from the waste management area. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of space that we have a lot to do with, that we can do a lot. So we could be looking at examples that we have, if you look in the picture, as Port Granby, Ontario, another CNL site. That was turned into a nature reserve. So we would be willing to take certainly input from the public on anything that that we can do with the Whiteshell site. Next slide, please. And this is all part of the public and indigenous engagement process. Hearing from you, hearing from communities on what can be done at the site, both short-term and long-term. What you see are just examples of some of the ideas. Indigenous nations, as rights holders, will have a central role and say. Final cleanup planning and future use will reflect input and feedback from First Nations, Métis, local municipalities, community organizations, and the general public. Okay, next slide, please. And the next one, please. Over the last year or so, we've been focused on engaging in the public by going out to events and discussing and gathering feedback regarding the proposed plans for the Whiteshell site, answering any questions, as well as discussing any employment and contracting opportunities. And we will continue to do this. Next slide, please. Last May, CNL hosted a gathering of regional leaders, both Indigenous and local elected officials, to kick off the process and discuss what you have been hearing today. We plan on having another one this spring to continue listening and addressing issues. Next slide, please. And the next slide again. In early December, we also hosted a gathering of alumni that had worked and spent a significant portion of their careers working at Whiteshell in order to get some insight and feedback as well. A tremendous amount of history just in this room as well. And so a lot of research, a lot of development, and a lot of attachment to the Whiteshell site. Now we would like to hear from you. The Engage with CNL website gives you the opportunity to provide feedback and ask any question you may have after this webinar is complete. I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and I'd like to turn it over back to Mark. Sorry,
Okay,
that was
thank you,
Michael.
Alan. Sorry. Okay, thank you for that presentation. And I noticed we almost hit the 100 attendees mark, and so appreciate everyone's attendance today. We will just wait to see questions come in.
So, Mike, I'll just mention there was a question that we answered in writing about the license renewal application, and I see another one there, and we'll just type the answer for that one.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, we also got a question about the availability of the recording on YouTube. So just to remind everybody, we will share the YouTube link to the recording in both French and English in about a week when we get it posted.
Perfect. Okay, here's one. Is the province involved in the future land use discussions?
We involved the province through our public liaison committee. So they are involved through that way. So they would have seen something very similar as well. However, the important input is the future land uses and end states related to the local communities and the Indigenous communities. The province would be involved in on the regulatory side of it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alan State. I got so many windows open. Okay, let's make sure I'm not on mute. Next question. Alan stated that CNL has transported 6,700 cubic meters of radioactive waste to the Chalk River site. Over what time frame have these shipments taken place, and what categories of waste were included?
Mm-hmm.
I think off the top there is some security concerns with talking about when transportation took place, but I believe we can talk about the type of waste that was part of it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So a vast majority of it, and number off the top of my head, I don't have, but it'd be well over 90% would be low-level radioactive waste, and that would be mostly attributed to the restoration or the decommissioning of various structures on the site. And there would have been a handful of shipments of intermediate level waste as well from legacy waste that was on site. But all of that goes through a very rigorous licensing and regulatory process before it gets shipped.
Okay. Thanks, Alan. Just rolling through. So we are getting a lot of questions. We'll kind of bunch some questions into one about SMRs and potential SMR vendors. Is there anything we can say about CNL considering becoming a proponent for SMRs at Whiteshell?
Yeah, we do get a lot of questions on that. So an SMR, the licensing and siting of an SMR would be on the proponent themselves. So Starcore Nuclear is one company that their name's been out there with a lot of interest in maybe setting one up in the field, or sorry, in the region, and the Whiteshell site could possibly host that. CNL would certainly support that. However, all of that would be on the proponent themselves. And I do believe they're in the very early stages of licensing.
Okay, thank you. What will be the end state of the waste management area? Will it be somehow remediated, covered, or leave as is for long-term monitoring?
So the key to that would be the trenches, the low-level waste trenches. So just briefly, they were operated from the mid 60s up until the mid 80s, and they were essentially dug into the clay and the waste was low-level radioactive waste was put in there and then covered up again. We're in the process. Sorry, take a bit of a step back. The 2002 environmental assessment stated that the approved pathway would be in situ disposal of that waste. We are currently looking at other options for disposition of the trenches. So a lot of that would depend on if in situ disposal does move forward for the trenches. So that's one of the areas where there would be a very small footprint of restricted access. Actually, if you go back on the slides there, Mike, if you can, to the map of the whole site and the end state land uses. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. So that would be the right at the top middle right there. So the trenches themselves would be a restricted area, and then there would be a buffer zone around that as well. So it does follow an exclusion zone around it. So it depends on the disposition of what we do with the low level waste in the trenches.
Okay, thank you. Okay. There are some rather technical questions being submitted, but we will get written responses for those when we send out our email with the links. What are the costs to date and the projected total costs?
Oh, I couldn't share that.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe if it's appropriate, we could give that in writing, but I can't share that.
Okay. Okay. Could you provide a link to the draft plan for convenience? Is there any type of, is the plan public or?
We've distributed the draft plan to all the local municipalities and the also Indigenous or the First Nations and the Manitoba Métis for their input. I think I'll have to work with our communications teams to see what would be the best mechanism to get a wider sharing of the plan, because there could be some other technical issues we may need to address before it would go out for public consumption.
Okay. What kind of info can you find on the Engage with CNL page?
The Engage with CNL is certainly the and then somebody from maybe Margot or Rachel can jump in as well. But it's a mechanism for the public to ask any questions for us. Plus, it gives a high level overview of what we do, not only at Whiteshell but in the company as well.
Yeah, Al, I can help you out with that. Good morning, everybody. Rachel Chenette, Communications Officer. So the Engage with CNL page has a little bit more information on what we were talking about here today, and information on the future of the Whiteshell site. And it really does serve as a good mechanism for CNL to hear from interested members of the public and Indigenous communities, First Nations, and organizations, just to gain a little bit more understanding. So there's lots of prompting questions and places where you can review information and provide us your thoughts. And that comes directly to the communications staff who share it with Al and the rest of the Whiteshell team.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Okay, we'll keep going with a few more. Will a security component remain on site once everything has been decommissioned?
Sorry, could you repeat that? It cut out a little bit on me.
Okay, will a security component remain on site once everything has been decommissioned?
Okay. So certainly as our, the footprint and the risks of the site decrease as we remediate the site, those requirements might change. However, there would be some aspect of institutional control if our proposed plans are accepted and move forward. So, for example, WR1 and the trenches. So with that would be, and I can't say exactly what, but some level of monitoring, both physical and environmental.
All right, thank you. So we did get a question on a specific question on WR1, the reactor. It wasn't the focus of our webinar today, but we will follow up in writing to that question, just to let you know. And I think it's probably a good time now to do the poll, Margot, if that's all right. So we have a poll question on what type of subjects you would like Whiteshell to cover. It's open-ended, so you can write whatever topic you would like. So we'll just wait a minute for people to write their answers.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And it should be a good one today, I think, because we had a lot of questions that arose from this webinar. And I think that some of those topics could be entire webinars themselves. So we should have some good responses, and we can look to having future webinars on some of these topics.
Oh, I'm on mute. Okay, just seeing if we can beat NPD. We had 11 responses at NPD. We're at 9 right now, so we need 3 more people to answer.
Yeah, and another thing I'll mention is we had Alan on today, and some of these questions were more about WR1. So future webinar topics might be around WR1, and we'll get the responses to those questions from the right subject matter experts that are leading that project.
Yeah, good point, Margot. Thank you. All righty. Okay, so with the remaining questions, they will be written responses. All right, we're at 13 responses for the poll, so that's great. Okay, so the remaining questions we will get in writing. So looks like we'll wrap up now. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Alan, for a great presentation. Good first webinar that you've done. I did see that there was a great job, Alan, comment on the Q&A. And you're getting some applause here, an emoji applause. So if you're learning more, you can check out the engagewithcnl.ca, or you can email us anytime, ermstakeholder@cnl.ca. So we will, again, we're hammering this down, but we will get all of the questions that we couldn't get to, or any of the really technical questions. We will get them in writing and send them out. Excuse me. Once we get the links for YouTube for people who couldn't come today. So it'll be an email to everyone that registered, links to YouTube, and answers to all the other questions. So thank you for attending. This was a really great turnout. So there's lots of interest out at Whiteshell, or if you're in Ontario, wherever you are watching, we will look over those poll answers that you submitted, and we'll go from there for what topics to cover next time. Again, Alan, thank you. Peter, who's supporting, Margot, Rachel, great job as always. So thank you very much. Stay safe and have a great day.